What if the woman you promised forever betrays you not just with anyone, but with the man living right next door? This isn't just another story of betrayal. It's about scorched earth revenge, a courtroom battle, and the price of lies. Welcome back to Cheating Stories 7. If you're new here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because today's story will keep you on edge until the very end. Now, let's dive into this shocking tale. She cheated with my neighbor. I went scorched earth and destroyed her in court. I met Amber on a night designed to make strangers brave. The vineyard had strung warm bulbs over the courtyard, and each glass of champagne held its own small sun. The bride, my friend since freshman year, parked me at a table with cousins and co-workers because, in her words, I'm good at making small talk feel less small. Amber arrived late enough to be noticed, hair pinned like she didn't want to trap it, dressed the color of a secret. She laughed at something the bride whispered and crossed the patio toward the only empty chair, mine. She wasn't just pretty, she was kinetic. During the first slow song, she let the bride's grandfather lead and made him look like he'd never forgotten how. When the toasts began, she took the mic and improvised a short bit about love as a team sport. It should have been corny. Somehow it wasn't. She landed a joke about the groom's obsessive knife sharpening, and the room clapped because she made clapping feel like participation instead of politeness. When she finally sat beside me, she studied the dessert menu as if it were a map. "Which one is worth the calories?" she said, "and don't say all of them." I chose the lemon tart. Anything that risks burning on the way out of the oven tends to be honest. She laughed, and the laugh stayed. We compared road trip playlists and argued whether a certain song belonged before sunrise or after midnight. She hated adaptations that cut the quiet beats. I admitted I still print directions even with a phone in my pocket. She called it charming and wrong in the same breath. After dinner, the groom tilted his head at the dance floor like a dare. We weren't good dancers, but we were committed ones. Amber visited the downbeat often, and I learned to follow without stepping on her dress. Then a supermarket anthem arrived, and for no reason I can explain, it felt like a hymn. She leaned close enough for me to count freckles I hadn't noticed and said, "You look like a man who's been waiting for permission to have fun." "I might need a form signed by you," I said. She rolled her eyes without moving away. The DJ layered in a run of songs everyone half knew. We laughed through missed lyrics and clapped on 2s and 4s like we'd rehearsed. Someone handed us plastic tambourines. We refused with the dignity of people who knew their limits. By the last number, we were the couple people cheered for, not because we deserved a spotlight, but because the room liked easy endings. We kissed like people who had agreed not to overthink it. A friend mouthed finally as she passed. A phone flashed. For a moment, the future was a hallway with every light on. We didn't exchange numbers. It felt like superstition, a dare to the night. If this mattered, it wouldn't need help. She left with the bridesmaids, shoes in hand, laughing at something only they could hear. I stayed to stack chairs, then drove home with the windows down so the air could file a report with my skin. The ring road was empty. I sang the hymn that wasn't and decided not to ruin a good story by rushing it. A week later, she texted. The bride had given her my contact with a warning that I graded playlists. "Prove her wrong," Amber wrote. "Coffee?" The corner shop hissed like a train each time the barista pulled a shot. Our first date was messy in the ways that make second dates automatic. She dripped oat milk on her thumb and swore softly. I overexplained my desk job and my side job coaching baseball, and she asked real questions instead of trying to polish me up. We didn't pretend we weren't auditioning, but we didn't pretend to be flawless either. Rituals arrived without permission. Sunday coffee became a law. On Tuesdays, we texted pictures of the sky because naming colors together made distance feel like cooperation. Saturdays meant the farmer's market, where she gathered herbs she would forget to cook, and I bought peaches I ate leaning over the sink. We found a photo booth near the arcade and fed it quarters until our faces looked like a flip book about a joke that kept getting better. Friends tried to play matchmaker anyway, suggested restaurants, asked about timelines, staged group photos that pretended to be casual. It didn't matter. The story was writing itself with the ordinary pen of two people who kept showing up. Life tested the feeling with small, ordinary obstacles. Her boss moved a deadline, and she canceled dinner with an apology and a new plan already attached. Practice ran late, and she slid into the bleachers with a thermos and learned the difference between a two-seamer and a four-seamer because it mattered to me. We traded kindnesses that never made speeches, a phone charger in a glove box, a playlist cued to the right track, a note on a napkin that said eat something green. Before Amber, I didn't trust easy stories. I thought anything worth keeping had to be survived first, like a storm that earns you a badge. But she laughed without charging admission and listened in a way that made me want to tell better truths. That wedding night became a drawer I kept returning to, a place where the answer lived before the question finished forming. A clean, unargued yes. I didn't know I would one day measure silence against that yes, or hold up the bright hallway of that last song beside darker rooms. I only knew that at the beginning nothing felt calculated. It felt chosen. It felt like we had both said the same simple sentence and meant it. See you Sunday. If the wedding felt like a door swinging open, that first year together was the hallway, warm, lit, and filled with coats hanging on shared hooks. We discovered our domestic superpowers without ceremony. I could look at a wobbly shelf and hear where the stud was. Amber could plate takeout like a tasting menu and make a Tuesday look intentional. She'd wipe condensation from a glass with a cloth napkin and set it down at a perfect angle, then grin like she knew she had gotten away with something. We practiced conflict the way people practice a language, daily, imperfectly, but with good faith as our accent. Whenever the old static of defensiveness began to build, one of us would text, "I need a minute," and the other respected the minute. Later, we circled back and asked the only question that ever fixed anything. What was the argument really about? The answer was rarely the dish or the bill, but often a bruise from an earlier day that hadn't been named yet. Trips stacked themselves into a collage of small adventures. A foggy coastal town where we overspent on oysters because the server swore they tasted like rain. We walked the pier under gulls that sounded like gossip and warmed our hands on paper cups of chowder. A desert drive where the horizon felt like a dare, ending at a motel with a pool that glowed electric blue. We swam after dark, the water cold enough to shock us honest, the sky so clean it felt like a revision of itself. In the morning, we peeled oranges by the stairs and laughed at a family struggling to stage the perfect photo, the kind that never reveals who was grumpy between frames. My life fit neatly inside predictable lines. Spreadsheets at the day job, practice plans for the infield at the high school, a whistle that made me sound more certain than I felt. I liked routine because it promised I wouldn't drop anything important. Amber liked novelty because it promised she wouldn't fall asleep while holding it. New restaurants, new podcasts, new routes home. I mistook her appetite for surprise as just another dialect of joy. Maybe it was. Maybe I wanted it to be. On Sundays, we held fast to our coffee ritual, grading our week like teachers. What worked, what didn't, where we could be kinder. We gave each other small extra credit. She learned the difference between a two-seamer and a four-seamer and heckled me about my loyalty to an underperforming team. I learned the names of her co-workers and the little office economies that governed who ate lunch with whom. Sometimes we argued about trivial things, whether the good knife should go in the dishwasher, whether an avocado was ripe enough. And then we'd laugh because being wrong together felt safer than being right alone. 2 years in, I bought an unflashy ring and wrote a speech that kept rearranging itself every time I rehearsed. My hands shook the entire day. I hid the ring beneath the sugar packets at the coffee shop because a grand gesture felt like borrowing someone else's clothes. When she found the box, she laughed once, sharp, surprised, and then cried in a way that made the whole room quieter. I stumbled through most of my speech, tripping over the part about choosing the boring work of kindness, and she said yes before I even reached the line where I asked, We stayed long enough for the barista to clap without irony. Our wedding was smaller than the one where we first met, but heavier in weight. We held it in a backyard that smelled of rosemary and new mulch. Vows arrived unscripted and sincere, the kind of promises you can only make when you've seen each other scramble eggs and pay late fees. Ryan stood up for me and kept his speech under 2 minutes. Amber's sister, Claire, ended hers with a line so tender it made the dog whine. We danced on a plywood square that tilted slightly toward the hydrangeas, and it didn't matter. People cried. We ate cake that left butter on our fingers, and we didn't apologize for licking it off. Our first apartment as a married couple was an upstairs box with stubborn windows and a basil plant we overwatered like affection. We made a budget and saved it with optimistic file names. New car maybe, house someday, vacation when. We shared calendars and put everything on them. Trash night, birthdays, dentist, date. Because nothing was too ordinary to deserve remembering. On Saturday mornings, we blasted the radio and cleaned like we were people in a training montage. I fixed the door that stuck in humidity. She bought a rug that made the room sound better. She practiced introducing herself with my last name, then kept her own because it fit her mouth like it had earned the space. Friends called us solid, and I wore the word like a medal. Solid meant no explosions, no scorch marks, just the quiet excellence of showing up with what you promised. I believed ordinary done right was the miracle, 2 people choosing unremarkable kindnesses that outlast the fireworks. I believed in Sundays that arrived on schedule. I believed in us because we kept proving we meant to be us. Even then, there were tiny weather shifts I didn't recognize as weather. A new podcast she binged alone. A restaurant she tried with coworkers before suggesting it to me. A habit of leaving one earbud in while brushing her teeth. Small things that could be explained generously, a dozen different ways. I chose one of the generous ones and held it up to the light until it looked like truth. On the night we unpacked our final box, we sat on the floor and ate takeout from cartons because chairs felt like a future version of us, and we were patient. She plated the leftovers like a chef anyway, sprinkled sesame seeds like confetti, and told me we were good at this. This meaning the work of making a life look intentional. I believed her. I rinsed the containers and set them to dry like the first draft of a routine. Later, lying in the dark, I promised myself that if we ever lost this softness, I would know it right away. I didn't, not right away. Hairline fractures never announce themselves. They creep in quietly, wearing the kind of shoes that don't make sound on hardwood. The first shift feels small enough to praise as maturity. Amber begins leaving her phone face down on the table, saying she's trying to be more present. I believe her because it's a good sentence and because I want to. The second shift doesn't ask permission. Laughter that used to bloom right beside me starts drifting to other rooms, hallways, porches, corners of the house where I'm not invited. She says, "Be right back," with a casual smile and returns with eyes still carrying conversations I was never part of. Girls' night migrates from occasional to routine. At first, it's the last Friday of the month, then every other Friday, and soon a floating appointment that overrides anything on our shared calendar. Plans stop being discussed. They're reported. "I'm out with the girls," she texts, and a location pin lands in a bar we've never visited together. I type "have fun" and stare at the 3 dots as if I'm a weatherman watching a storm that refuses to move off the coast. Intimacy gets scheduled like a dentist appointment, then bumped like one too. "This week is bananas," she says. "Let's try Sunday." Sunday arrives crowded with laundry and headaches. I learn the choreography of being turned down politely. I tell myself it's just the normal ebb after the wedding high, that we are adjusting to grown-up lives with competing demands. It's easier to narrate a dip than to name a fall. When I ask what's different, she reframes the conversation into my insecurity. "You go quiet and then read into everything," she says, calm and almost amused. "Babe, not everything is a signal." She is expert at making worry look like immaturity, and I don't like how quickly I accept the role. I leave those talks carrying a silence that hums inside my ribs like an appliance I can't locate but always hear. So I try harder in the ways I know. I scrub the sink until the steel reflects like a mirror. I meal prep on Sundays, stacking containers neatly as if I could organize our future into staying. I light her favorite citrus candles before she gets home so the apartment smells like intention. I queue up playlists from the good months, turning the volume low, a soft suggestion. None of it changes the draft in the room. The air moves past me like I'm just another piece of furniture. Friends still call us solid. They say it during game nights and double dates as if it's both a compliment and a diagnosis. I nod, smile, and change the subject. It's hard to explain a language I can't translate, a subtext I can't catch. At practice, I overcoach footwork and transfers, gripping routine like a rail on a moving train. The boys do the drills, but they keep looking at me like I'm somewhere else. They aren't wrong. The phone habits evolve again. Notifications get cleared before they can sound. A new passcode appears without discussion. One earbud stays in during dishes. Just finishing this episode, but when I ask which podcast, she shrugs like she never remembers names. I tell myself I'm old-fashioned about privacy, that curiosity is a petty sin. But another part of me, the part that counts, starts keeping score. Nights out, sudden showers before bed, lipstick staying in her bag instead of on the bathroom shelf. One Tuesday, she cancels dinner with a text that says emergency client thing. Sorry, sorry, sorry. And an hour later, I get a selfie from a restaurant I know because she once posted it with me. Coworkers dragged me out, she writes. I type proud of you and mean it, but I sit there with the oddness of being proud she is somewhere we used to share together. When I try again to name the change, she sighs like a teacher giving me one more chance to get the answer right. You're reading into nothing, she says. You've been clingy. The word lands sharp like chalk squealing on a board. I want to argue that I haven't changed, that my schedule is steady, that the only new thing is how the light moves differently through our apartment. But she's already pivoted to the dishes, to her email, to a headline about the world being hard enough without this conversation. Small tendernesses start to feel like lies. I stop kissing her goodbye in the mornings because the gesture makes my throat ache. I switch to a half-joking salute with my coffee mug so it looks playful instead of painful. She doesn't notice, or she pretends not to, or maybe she notices and files it away as proof of my mood. At night, she falls asleep with her phone face down, the lock screen hidden behind a code I don't know. I lie beside her counting her breaths, as if turning them into numbers could give me certainty. Ryan asks if I'm good, which is how men say I'm worried. I answer work is loud, which is how men say I don't want to talk about it yet. In a notebook, I keep 2 lists I show no one. One is called things that used to be easy. The other is called maybe I'm overreacting. Items migrate between lists depending on the hour and the angle of the sun. There are still good days, which is the trick. She brings me coffee to the bleachers and heckles my shortstop. We try a new taco place and laugh about too much cilantro. She kisses me in a parking lot, and I let myself believe the draft was just weather. Then the week resets, and the old quiet returns, familiar enough to pass for furniture, heavy enough to feel like a guest. If there's one truth I recognize too late, it's this. Contempt travels light and settles wherever it's fed. I catch the first crumbs of it on my own tongue, little thoughts that excuse distance, jokes I don't make because they would be too easy, too unkind. I swallow them, but I taste them anyway. Trust, I realize, is not a cliff you fall from. It's a hallway where you stop taking steps one by one, until you look up and the door is already far behind you, and the floor plan has changed without asking. Discovery didn't arrive with fireworks. It came with the dry click of a glove box and the chemical smell of dashboard cleaner. I was in Amber's car, searching for a lost parking pass because the school had issued new ones and mine never made it home. I checked the visor, the door pocket, the manual. Then I reached under the passenger seat and felt plastic that didn't belong to the car. A cheap phone case, scuffed at the corners. The screen lit with 6% battery left, like a confession too tired to argue. No fingerprint lock, just a 4-digit code I didn't need. The messages didn't require translation. Images, jokes disguised as irony, logistics pinned to a map of our neighborhood. Thursday after yoga, that back alley by the murals. Saturday during the game, less traffic. The contact at the top was just a number, a coward's choice. But the photos told the story clearly. The man was Derek, my neighbor, smirking in a kitchen I knew well down to the chipped blue tile backsplash. His fridge reflected in the glass, the same one covered in team magnets I saw whenever I waved across the fence. And in one shot, his hand rested on Amber's hip, reflected in the oven door behind her smile. Rage surged like voltage. My hands wanted to shake, to throw, to smash the weight of this quiet little phone. But another current replaced it, steady, cold, precise. Focus. I set the phone to airplane mode. At our dining table, I laid out a legal pad, my laptop, and a portable drive I usually reserved for baseball footage. I screen recorded the entire thread from the beginning, every photo, every timestamp. I saved it to the drive, then to the cloud, then to an encrypted folder with a name that meant nothing. I printed it all and dated each page. I started a timeline on the legal pad, then a second one listing the moments I remembered feeling crazy. The 2 columns lined up more often than I wanted them to. I didn't accuse her. I didn't shout. The apartment was too quiet for shouting to be anything but theater, and I was finished performing for someone who already knew the lines. When Amber came home, she said she was wiped. I said I was grading. We moved through the rooms like neighbors instead of spouses, echoes of a marriage, not the sound. She fell asleep with the second phone hidden somewhere, but I didn't need to check again. I already had enough. In the office, the printer hummed steadily, page after page. It sounded like a machine heartbeat that calmed me. Paper doesn't gaslight. In the morning, I wrote names on an index card. Attorney, locksmith, bank, therapist. Then I added 2 more because the legal pad demanded it. Camera installer, doctor. Beneath them all, I underlined one rule twice until the ink dented the card. Don't become the worst thing that happened to you. It looked corny on paper. It looked like the only rule I could trust. I called a law firm 3 towns over, far from my team, my students. My wife's smile. The receptionist promised a consultation. I emailed a sanitized note. I have evidence. I prefer a no-fault conversation with a fault-forward outcome. I took photos of the binder I'd started and locked the binder itself in a duffel bag hidden behind camping gear in my trunk. I taped a flash drive copy beneath the bottom drawer of my desk. Paranoid, maybe. Focused, definitely. Next, I called the bank. I couldn't close the joint account without notice, but I stopped automatic transfers and set alerts for withdrawals. I changed the passwords that belonged to me and listed the ones that didn't. I froze my credit, then texted Ryan, "Lousy company tonight, beer?" He replied with a thumbs up and the name of a bar with bad lighting. Perfect. On the porch, I ran into Derek mowing his lawn. He raised 2 fingers in a lazy salute, the kind neighbors share when they know each other's trash day. The ordinary violence of it made my vision go white for a second. I blinked until my eyes agreed to be useful again. Then I walked back inside before I could make a decision the index card would hate. That night, I reviewed the thread again, this time like a stranger building a case. I noted the patterns, days, excuses, soft language that disguised hard intent. I made a list titled What a Judge Would Notice. Consistency, duration, proximity. I added screenshots of the maps, a picture of their wine matching the label in our own kitchen. I didn't know why that detail mattered, only that it did. By evening, a plan had replaced panic. I scheduled a therapist for Friday morning, a doctor for the afternoon. I ordered a basic interior camera for the living room, careful to check state laws, keeping the sound off. I didn't want a crime of my own. I wanted evidence. Amber texted she'd be home late. Girls' night again. I replied, "Have fun," and stared at the wall until the clock stopped being something I could measure. When she finally came in, I was at the table with my gradebook and the index card turned face down. She kissed my head out of habit and asked if I wanted anything from the fridge. I said no because what I wanted wasn't in there. Later, I slid the binder into a cheap office safe I'd bought on the way home, wedged it behind old yearbooks in the hall closet. I set the code to the anniversary we would never celebrate again. Petty, maybe. Sacred enough for tonight. On the index card, beneath the underlined rule, I wrote one last reminder in block letters. The proof is not for argument. It's for the judge. It's for the part of me that will ask later if it was really this bad. Then I turned off the light and let the room go dark around the new shape of my life. The match I had struck was not rage. It was paperwork. It was preparation. It was the clean edge of a plan. Stillness is a skill no one teaches until you desperately need it. I practiced in the elevator to the 5th floor, watching numbers blink across brushed steel. The law office smelled of toner and lemon cleaner, a scent that suggested nothing rotten could survive inside paperwork. The receptionist handed me a clipboard, the pen heavy like a tool. When the attorney arrived, he shook my hand once and listened the way carpenters listen to studs, tapping for hollows. "It's an at-fault state," he said after I laid out the facts. "Infidelity matters." Property divisions rearranged themselves in sentences I didn't know could comfort. He didn't promise fireworks, he promised math. I slid the binder across his desk with the composure of an archivist. He opened to the page with the map pins, nodded once like a man who had seen this exact wound 100 times. Copies were made. The originals returned to my backpack. "Don't confront her," he said. "Let us serve. Keep all communication minimal and through counsel." I wrote it down even though I already knew. In the hallway, I texted Ryan, not to confess because confession wants an audience and I was finished performing, but to ask for a drink later. He replied with a time and the shrug emoji I pretended not to see. At work, I moved through my inbox as if the day had no sharp edges. I answered a parent's question about batting order. I returned a borrowed stapler. I updated practice plans with drills that kept teenagers too busy to notice their coach's silence. Colleagues chatted about a new faux place. I smiled and said I'd go. Rage wanted to be performed. I declined. I rerouted it into alarms labeled like errands, cancel subscription, separate passwords, export bank statements, photograph valuables. The tasks were small and exact, keeping my hands occupied without lending them to destruction. I bought a notebook with numbered pages and logged every call, every voicemail I forwarded to counsel, every text I refused to answer. The discipline felt like scaffolding around something cracked but still standing. That night, Amber cooked an unfamiliar recipe plated too neatly, the kind of dinner that arrives after an apology you were never given. "Try it while it's hot," she said, as if the line itself was a metaphor. I said thanks without tasting, then took a bite because being petty wasn't the kind of man I wanted to become next. It was fine. She watched my face like a weather app waiting for a forecast. "Everything okay?" she asked. I answered honestly in a way she couldn't hear. "It will be." She shifted into the voice she used for closing arguments, sentences sharpened by rehearsal. "You've been distant, you barely talk, I don't know what else to do." I stopped engaging in conversations that began with accusations. Silence became my border. It wasn't cold, it was calibrated. I let sentences die in the air without giving them oxygen. I didn't correct, didn't reframe, didn't soothe. The first night, the quiet felt like a cliff edge. By the third, it felt like a fence I could lean against. In the bedroom, I gathered documents into a single box, photographing the contents before sealing the lid. In the kitchen, I cataloged the good knives, the coffee grinder, even the serial numbers of appliances, because Petty claims love expensive objects. I emailed myself copies and slid another set into the safe. When she texted, "Where are you?" I replied at practice. True and nothing more. The attorney had warned me, avoid any sentence that could become a spark. I followed it like a recipe that worked only if I didn't improvise. When she left a voicemail starting with "We need to talk," I forwarded it without listening. The rule was simple. If it could be in writing, let it be in writing, not in my bloodstream. Later, I met Ryan at a bar with bad lighting and better anonymity. He ordered 2 beers and a water because someone needed to be the adult. We talked about small things first, the shortstop's bad footwork, the coffee shop changing beans, the weather pretending to be fall. Then I said, "It's happening." He didn't ask for details. "Okay," he said, "what do you need from me?" I told him I might need him present the day papers were served, that I'd like him to hold a copy of the footage off-site. He nodded. We clinked glasses without ceremony. Back home, I felt the urge to search for more old tablets, forgotten drawers, but I let it go. I had enough. Enough was a safety word. I sat at the table and rewrote the index card in cleaner letters. Attorney, locksmith, bank therapist, camera installer, doctor. Beneath the list, I underlined my rule again. Don't become the worst thing that happened to you. Then I added another line. The point is not spectacle. The point is consequence. I scheduled the locksmith for Saturday morning, the therapist for Friday at 9. I set aside cash in an envelope not because I expected catastrophe, but because contingencies created space in my chest where panic used to live. Amber drifted through the house like someone rehearsing a role. She left her phone face down, then face up, then face down again. She asked whether I'd seen her blue sweater. She offered a movie. I declined. When she asked, "Are you mad at me?" I said, "I'm making plans." It was the truest answer I had. She laughed once. Brittle then said she was going out with the girls. I nodded. The door closed with a click that didn't need interpretation. I went to bed early and woke before the alarm. The printer was quiet. The binder was complete for now. In the kitchen, I washed a plate by hand and listened to the water strike porcelain. It was clean, unarguable. Stillness wasn't passivity, it was posture. And I practiced it the way you practice a stance. Knees soft, eyes level, weight balanced. Not about winning arguments in kitchens. About landing the exit clean. The bar was one of those places that pretended not to try. Vinyl booths patched with tape. A neon beer sign that flickered like a faulty heartbeat. A jukebox heavy with songs about leaving before you're ready. Ryan got there early, already carrying the kind of worry you only pack for people you love. He stood when I walked in, eyes searching my face for answers I wasn't ready to say aloud. We slid into the corner booth, backs to the wall, eyes toward the door. "What's the worst of it?" Ryan asked, his voice low beneath the clink of glass. I didn't dramatize. I laid out the timeline like a coach diagramming a play, steady, precise. The wedding where it began, the years that bloomed, the hairline cracks, the secret phone, the binder now sealed in a safe. I said Derek's name as if I were entering it into evidence. I mentioned the attorney, the state's false statute, the copies stored in places even I might forget. I didn't mention rage. I didn't need to. It lived in the careful way I held my glass, in the way I kept each sentence from catching fire. Ryan's jaw worked. I introduced him. I told you he seemed decent. You introduced a neighbor, I said. He introduced his character. I nudged the water toward him, both of us knowing the night was long. I'm not chalking outlines around blame. I just need a plan. The plan became the third person at the table. Ryan would be on call the day service happened. Engine warm, parked a house away, phone recording if anything tilted. He'd hold a duplicate of the camera feeds on a drive that never touched the cloud. He'd stand as witness if I needed one at the door. If Amber came in a storm, he would be the barometer, calm, present, unmovable. We ran contingencies until the waitress forgot us, then remembered with another round. No shouting matches on the lawn. No midnight confrontations. No text to Derek, not even the tempting one-line truth. If there was a message, it would go where evidence belonged through counsel. Ryan wrote it all down as if ink itself could steady the future. No spectacle, only consequence. "What about your health?" he asked finally. "You're going to see a doctor?" "Already scheduled," I said. "Thursday. After that, I'll tell the people who deserve to know, her parents maybe, and Derek's fiancée. She didn't sign up for any of this." Ryan nodded, his eyes softer now. "You'll handle that gently." "I'll handle it plainly," I said. Gently is how we got here. Behind us, a couple sang into each other's shoulders. The jukebox coughed and spun another Rhodes song. Ryan dragged a finger through the condensation ring his glass had left and circled back to the subject that mattered most. "When this ends, what do you want an average morning to feel like?" The answer was waiting inside me, fully formed. Quiet, I said. Coffee that tastes like its own reward, a door I can close that doesn't keep out the truth, a home heavy with honesty. I found a receipt in my pocket and wrote it down, the first purchase for the life after. We talked about small things for a while, testing whether the world still worked. The infield that needed more reps, the faucet at his place that leaked again, the stubborn ordinariness that refused to leave. Then we drifted back to the edge. Ryan asked about the day-to-day between now and service. I laid out a playbook, keep every conversation with Amber transactional. Answer nothing that smells like bait. Don't defend, don't accuse, don't explain. I'll be there, Ryan said. You won't do this alone. At last call, the lights brightened just enough to reveal the bar's honest shape. The waitress set down 2 waters like benedictions. Ryan reached for his wallet, but I already had the check. Control was still a muscle I could move. Outside, the parking lot was bright and empty, the night briefly merciful. Ryan pulled me into a quick, rounding hug. You're doing this like a surgeon, he said. No wild cuts. No more bleeding, I answered. Back home, I set the receipt on my desk and copied the sentence into a notebook I kept for honest things. Then I added a list, a liturgy of small survival, call the bank, export statements, inventory valuables, rotate passwords, box the wine glasses she liked so I wouldn't reach for them by accident. At the bottom, I underlined a reminder twice. Don't become the worst thing that happened to you. I powered down the printer, let the house grow quiet, and rehearsed the only conversation left to have, with myself in daylight, about what deserves saving and what gets burned. The plan slept on the desk between us, humming like a small machine of mercy. By morning, I would lace my shoes, run the field with a whistle and a bucket of balls, and pretend to care about hops and throws until I actually did. Routine was a bridge, and tomorrow I would walk across it. I didn't spring it on her. I scheduled it the way you schedule a dentist appointment you've been avoiding. At noon, I sent a text. Can you come home by 6? We need to go over something. No accusation, no emojis, just the temperature of a closed door. At 5:58, Amber's car slid into the driveway. She entered with a practiced brightness, a bag dangling from her arm, her hair still perfect, her voice a notch too loud. What's this about? I've had a long day. She set the bag on the counter like an alibi and leaned against the island, arms crossed, posture defensive but wrapped in casual clothing. I gestured toward the dining table. I had cleared it, 1 glass of water, a yellow legal pad, the binder. Sit, I said, steady. You can go first. Amber didn't waste the invitation. She launched immediately into inversion. You've been distant. You barely talk. When I ask how you are, you give me that corporate speak answer. Then minimization. Every marriage cools down. It's normal. Then ridicule. And the phone thing, that's just paranoia. Honestly, Ethan, it's not a good look. I listened with the face of a notary. I didn't argue. I didn't correct. I let the performance run until it began repeating itself like a playlist stuck on shuffle. When the loop circled back to your imagining things, I opened the binder. The sound was small but decisive, rings unlatching, plastic sleeves whispering. I slid the first page across. A text thread cropped cleanly, dates and times crisp as courtroom clocks. Her jokes with the faceless number, her selfies framed by our kitchen tile. I slid the next, a location ping 4 streets over, time-stamped girls' night. Then a photo, Derek's reflected grin in the oven glass, his hand on Amber's hip if you knew where to look. I didn't narrate. Paper spoke fluently. The air thickened. Amber's jaw set. Denial came first, automatic, almost bored. That's out of context. Then sharper, you're invading my privacy. Then pivoted into rage, you've been tracking me, that's sick. She reached to gather the pages, to reclaim the story with movement, but I lifted my hand, stop, and placed another set down. Hotel receipts, rideshare histories, the second phone's log. A tremor passed through her. Bargaining followed. Softer rain after thunder. It wasn't serious. It happened when we were fighting. You've been so cold. Her voice thinned into plea. I love you, you know that. We can fix this. We just need a reset. She stood, stepping toward me like the solution lived in skin contact. Her fingers brushed the air between us. I stepped back, not dramatic, deliberate. No, I said. The syllable landed like a switch flipped. Do not touch me. For a beat, I saw both versions of us, the people under string lights at a wedding years ago and the two who memorized each other's grocery lists and Sunday moods. The grief for those people was real, and I let it pass through me like a wave that had no shore to cling to. When it receded, I found the sentence I had rehearsed. Whatever this was, it will not be physical again. Not now, not ever. Amber's face crumpled, then hardened. You're overreacting, she said, oxygen thinner now. Couples come back from worse. I slid the final page across, my attorney's letter on firm letterhead, neutral and lethal. All communication goes through counsel. You'll be served at work within the week. Tonight, you're going to pack a bag. I'll have your things inventoried and boxed. A moving company will coordinate with you through your lawyer. My voice stayed even because fury would only wound me. Keys on the hook, phone on the counter. She laughed brittle. You think you're calm because you're strong, you're calm because you're weak. You'll regret this. I almost wished regret were possible. It would mean I could pretend the story had a different center. Instead, I said nothing. Silence did more work than any speech now. Amber moved through the house, performing little acts of ownership, slamming a drawer, yanking a suitcase, tugging clothes like they had misbehaved. I stood in the doorway, watching the choreography of departure. She hesitated over the framed wedding photo, then left it face down on the dresser. In the kitchen, she clattered her keys on the hook, typed something into her phone with furious precision, no doubt drafting victimhood for a group chat. At the threshold, she turned. For a split second, the mask slipped. She looked young, cornered by her own choices. If you had just, she began, but the sentence had nowhere to land. She shut the door behind her. The house held a new kind of quiet, not peace, but aftermath. I collected the pages, latched the binder, slid it back into my backpack. I texted Ryan one word, now. Then I walked through each room with my legal pad, writing the next steps, change passwords, pull camera footage, email bank statements to counsel, photograph drawers. In the hallway mirror, my face looked older months, maybe years. I didn't flinch. I had chosen my map and I was following it. On the counter, her water glass left a perfect ring. I wiped it with a towel, rinsed the towel, folded it neatly. I turned off the dining room light. In the dark, the binder's white spine caught the last slice of daylight. Paper doesn't argue, I thought. Paper remembers. And I was finished with any version of love that required me to forget. Procedure took over where confrontation left off. I no longer woke rehearsing speeches. I woke making lists. The attorney filed, and the case number arrived in my inbox like an unwanted forwarding address. He explained the timeline without flourish, service within days, a window for response, conferences that sounded like meetings but felt like autopsies. I took notes as if there would be a test. I changed beneficiaries where I could and froze what I could not move. Retirement accounts were a maze. The lawyer walked me through slowly without promising shortcuts. In this jurisdiction, fault matters, he said, tapping the binder like it was a lever. Leverage isn't cruelty, it's gravity. Together, we drafted a first offer designed for courtroom glare, half the house proceeds, half the liquid savings, no claim on my retirement beyond statutory minimums. No spousal support, because adultery had its own math here. Clean exit, not victory laps, he reminded me. I underlined the phrase twice. My anger preferred costumes, the law preferred numbers. At home, I began sorting the practical from the sentimental and discovered that very little belonged cleanly to either category. Practical, tax returns, car titles, warranties. Sentimental, a chipped mug we both reached for, a grocery list in her handwriting where cilantro was misspelled the same way every time. I boxed the sentimental anyway, because sentiment becomes weaponized by people who failed to protect it in life. Documentation became a muscle I exercised daily. Every call logged with date, time, and duration. Every voicemail forwarded to counsel. Every object photographed before it was boxed, serial numbers, condition, placement. I built a spreadsheet labeled inventory, not because I loved spreadsheets, but because judges did. Tabs for financials, tabs for communications, tabs for incidents, paper remembered what my nerves would try to forget. I notified the school I might need a day. I told the head coach I would keep practice running regardless. "You okay?" he asked in coach speak, which was his way of caring. "I'm squared away," I answered, which was my way of hiding it. I moved batting practice from Wednesday to Thursday because the process server liked clean schedules, and I refused to let teenagers learn late that adults can't show up. The attorney sent me a primer that read like an etiquette guide for war. Do not contact the opposing party about the case. Do not post on social media. Screenshots are forever. Do not threaten, cajole, or explain. Send it to me. Do not move money except to stop automatic transfers or pay ordinary bills. If you must speak, he said, make it calendar and logistics. If she provokes, let the paper speak. He was careful and a little bored. I found comfort in both. I told exactly 3 people and asked them to tell no one. Ryan, who already knew the shape of things. My father, who paused long enough to choose restraint over fury for my sake. And the head coach, because the kids deserved adults who planned around storms. Secrets had broken the marriage. Boundaries would build the exit. At the bank, I set alerts so my phone pinged at every odd withdrawal. I printed 6 months of statements, marking deposits in one color, transfers in another. I froze my credit and wrote the confirmation codes in the numbered notebook. I bought a small fireproof safe and slid the binder inside, not because I thought the house would burn, but because heat was coming. I forwarded my utility bills to a personal email Amber had never used. I changed the password to the cloud where the camera footage lived, then copied the files onto a drive Ryan agreed to keep. I stacked boxes in the garage with labels an insurance adjuster would respect. Kitchen, appliances, premarital, office, docs, tax 20XX 20XX. MISC, no sentimental value. I photographed the stacks from 3 angles and emailed them to my attorney with a single line, "For your records." Amber texted once to ask if I could swap a chore day. I answered with a neutral yes and a time window, nothing else. Later, a longer message arrived, braided with accusations and rewritten history designed to bait me into essays. I forwarded it without reply. At first, the discipline hurt. Then it felt like a cast protecting a break from being set wrong. We scheduled service at her office because safety was not paranoia. I sent the process server her photo to avoid confusion in a lobby full of polished people. I built a calm day around the appointment. A morning weightroom session with the team, attendance sheets turned in early, lunch packed so I wouldn't make decisions on low blood sugar. I gave Ryan the hour range, asked him to keep his ringer on, reminded him he might need to stand as a silent witness. He answered with a thumbs up and a promise to be boring. The lawyer and I rehearsed outcomes. She could hire counsel quickly, good. She could refuse, common. She could show up at the house, loud and performative, don't open the door. She could run to family, direct them to counsel. One rule never needed rehearsal. Don't contact Derek. I nodded. The point was not theater. The point was consequence, measured and documented. I installed another interior camera facing the front entry. Not to record conversations, just to show who entered and when. I read my state statutes like bedtime stories until I could recite the parts about consent and privacy. Stillness, I reminded myself, was not passivity. Stillness was posture. Once, late at night, I caught myself wanting to send a mass text. She burned this down, not me. Instead, I wrote it on a sticky note and threw it away. The only audience that mattered wore a robe and read slowly. The night before service, I walked through the house with a legal pad, narrating the obvious to steady myself. Dishwasher, working. Exterior lights on timers. Cameras recording, time synced. Binder locked, keys on hook. Index card on the fridge where only I would see it, clean exit, not victory laps. I went to bed early and slept heavy, grateful for a dream without doors. In the morning, I laced my shoes and ran in cold air until my lungs believed in the day. On the way back, I bought coffee that tasted like its own reward. The phone stayed quiet, which was its own kind of gift. Somewhere downtown, a receptionist would hand Amber an envelope that changed the shape of our map. I didn't celebrate. I adjusted my stance. The rest of this was work, and I was good at showing up. Truth never stays indoors. The moment I decided to widen the circle, it moved on its own. I began with my father. Over black coffee at the kitchen table, I set the binder between us but didn't open it. I spoke plainly, not for effect, but because fury had already burned itself clean. He listened without interruption, his hands folded, his eyes sharp but not hateful. When I finished, he nodded once. I raised you to tell the truth. You've done that. The rest will follow. No curses, no threats, just steady acceptance. Amber's parents received only a brief text. I thanked them for years of kindness, told them divorce proceedings had begun, and left it at that. I asked for no sides, no explanations. Still, within hours, my phone buzzed with fallout, her mother demanding details, her father requesting a call, her sister spitting blame in jagged sentences. I did not reply. Secrets had broken the marriage. Boundaries would build the exit. Derek's fiancée, Julia, deserved more. We met at a coffee shop where fluorescent lights made everyone look exhausted. I arrived early, the binder on the table like a silent second guest. She slid into the booth and I told her plainly, Derek and Amber had been involved for over a year. She didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She simply turned the pages one by one, lips pressed white, the evidence reflecting in her glasses. When she finished, she closed the binder gently, pushed it back toward me and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." It didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like acknowledgement, signing for a package she never ordered. Then she left, carrying with her the weight of a future dismantled in 30 minutes. The neighborhood metabolized scandal in its own way, whispers behind hedges, conversations spoken too loudly to be private. I became a shadow at block parties, nodding politely but refusing to feed the rumor mill. Some neighbors turned awkwardly kind, offering pies or sudden invitations to dinner. Others crossed the street, unwilling to choose sides. I accepted both with the same quiet shrug. At school, the boys on the baseball team sensed the shift. I told the infielders, "Keep your feet under you no matter the play," and realized I was giving myself advice. I hit grounders harder than necessary, grateful for the sting in my own palm. Repetition steadied me when nothing else could. What surprised me most was sleep. For weeks, nights had been rehearsals for confrontations that never happened, each version ending in anger. But after I told my father, after Amber's family knew, after Julia closed the binder, something lifted. That night I fell asleep before midnight, waking only once to the sound of rain, and realizing I no longer needed to check my phone. The truth had left my control. It was now a public object, retold and reshaped in ways I couldn't correct. Some would think me cruel, others a saint, others just another man in another sad story. I didn't chase any of those versions. The only person who needed the whole truth was the judge, and I was ready for that day. Claire arrived like weather decided, unhurried, carrying groceries and a look that could silence a room. She set the paper bags on the counter. Bread, eggs, greens, and a spray of eucalyptus that made the kitchen smell like new laundry. She rolled up her sleeves without preamble and said, "I'm cooking. You can sit or you can chop." So I chopped. Claire didn't defend Amber. She didn't perform outrage either. She salted the water, stirred the pan, and only after the onions turned translucent did she say the one thing no one else had offered me cleanly. "This is not your fault." No padding, no softeners, just the sentence placed on the table like cutlery. I nodded once, and the nod landed deeper than agreement. Something unclenched in my chest, a small animal finally convinced it wouldn't be chased tonight. Over the next 2 days, she reset the house to neutral. Laundry cycled through with the stern efficiency of a field hospital. The guest room became livable again, fresh sheets, a cracked window letting in honest air, a neat stack of towels that smelled like eucalyptus and warm cotton. She unplugged a lamp that hummed, wiped shelves in the fridge, tossed a jar of pickles 2 years past brave. In the living room, she straightened frames that had leaned since old arguments with gravity. "Everything should default to calm," she said, half to me, half to the space itself. That night at dinner, she admitted what I had already suspected. Amber had called her first with an abbreviated story designed to press old buttons. She asked me to take her side, Claire said not unkindly. I told her I'd take the side of facts. She hung up on me, then I came here. She shrugged, small but decisive. I don't want to be a soldier in someone else's version. We ate quietly, the kind of quiet that wasn't a test. Claire asked normal questions because normal refused to surrender. Was I sleeping? Was I eating food that actually grew from the ground? Did I have cash, copies, a spare key? I answered, realizing how much I had been surviving on checklists and coffee. Good, she said at each yes. We can fix that at the NOS. She scribbled a few practical notes and pocketed them like a mission briefing. In the absence of romance and in the presence of grief, a friendship staked its claim. She folded shirts the way stores taught her once. I changed the beeping smoke detector battery without being asked. She brought my team a bag of sliced oranges and clapped from the bleachers like she meant it. I fixed the wobbly chair in the guest room so she wouldn't feel like she had to balance while tying her shoes. Texts from Amber kept arriving at odd hours, statements disguised as questions, questions disguised as bait. Claire saw one light the screen, then deliberately looked away. I'm not here to read your mail, she said. Later, she answered Amber herself with 3 sentences I only learned about when Amber forwarded them elsewhere. I am safe. Ethan is safe. I won't be your messenger. When Amber called, Claire let it ring, then texted back, put it through your lawyer. For the first time in months, I felt cared for without agenda. Claire didn't demand my pain in exchange for her presence. She scrubbed dishes until the sink shone, labeled a shelf Misc Stress Snacks, and stocked it with almonds, dark chocolate, and a warning, don't apologize for using these. She tucked a note into my coaching binder. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are the person who refused to become it and never mentioned it again. On the second evening, we sat on the porch steps splitting a beer while the neighborhood rehearsed its gossip routes. Claire pointed at a jogger slowing near the house. You live among historians now, she said. Everyone's writing a book about you, and no one asked for your interview. I laughed because the joke was both cruel and kind. Let them publish fan fiction, I said. I'll stick to court filings. She laid down boundaries as clean as the laundry she folded. I'll support you as my friend and I guess brother-in-law emeritus, but I won't be a bridge for reconciliation campaigns. If you ever talk again, it'll be because your lawyers arranged it or because your futures intersect safely by accident. I won't run letters. I won't host summits. She looked me dead in the eye until I saluted with my bottle, ceremony for a good rule. Before bed, she asked for a favor that sounded like relief disguised as instruction. If Amber shows up, you call me, even if you've already called Ryan, even if the cops are already on their way. I won't fix it. I'll just stand there so your version has a second witness. It was the easiest promise I had made in months. I saved her contact as Claire Call First, and for the first time in a long while left my phone face up on the nightstand. Morning came simple. Claire left for work but returned with fresh bread and butter wrapped in gold paper, because some things should taste like celebration even when celebration isn't available. She showed me how to fold a fitted sheet. I showed her the deadbolt she could throw from the inside if she wanted to nap. You're allowed to rest in rooms you don't own, I said. So are you, she answered. When she finally packed to leave, the house felt less haunted and more empty in the honest way. At the door, she hugged me like family, brief, bracing, true. You're doing this well, she said. Don't confuse calm with weakness. Calm is a tool. After she left, I walked through each room and noticed the shift, not the facts. Those remained cold and documented. But the air, the angles, the way light fell without fighting its way in. I brewed coffee that tasted like its own reward and texted Ryan a photo of the labeled snack shelf. Then I added one more line to the index card on the fridge, beneath clean exit, not victory laps. Accept help that doesn't ask for a story. Offer thanks that doesn't require a speech. Service happened at noon. A man in a trim suit handing Amber an envelope across a glossy reception desk. By 6 p.m., the performance began. She pounded on my front door with the heel of her hand, lit from inside by anger and wine. Through the sidelight glass, I saw a version of her I barely recognized. Eyes too wide, smile trying to form and failing. She started loud and got louder, a monologue rehearsed for an audience she assumed included my neighbors. "Open the door, Ethan, be a man, tell them what you did to me." Her script was written to summon handcuffs before facts. On my refrigerator, the index card waited with its underlined rule, "Don't become the worst thing that happened to you." I placed my phone on speaker, called Ryan. Then, because she had asked me to, I called Claire. "She's here," I said. "I'm not opening the door." "Good," Claire answered. "I'm on my way." I kept the chain latched, my voice level through the wood. "Leave the property, Amber. Any communication goes through council." She laughed, brittle, and hammered the door again. A neighbor's porch light clicked on. Across the street, Ryan's wife lifted her phone, recording. Amber saw the lens and leaned into it, tilting her face toward the street lamp. "He hit me," she yelled. "Help, somebody help me." 10 minutes later, the first police car rolled up, lights low but authority humming. 2 officers stepped out, one knocked hard. "Sir, open up." I kept my hands visible near the deadbolt. "Officers, I have counsel. I will not open the door. I am safe inside. I have exterior camera footage you can view if needed." The second officer glanced at Ryan's wife, who held up her phone. "I've been recording since she arrived," she said. Amber pointed at the door like a prosecutor. "That's him. He assaulted me and threw me out." The nearer officer's posture tilted toward a familiar narrative. Man inside, woman outside, therefore guilty. He asked me again to open. I repeated calmly, "I'm safe inside. I have footage showing everything from the moment she arrived." I held my phone up to the sidelight so the second officer could see the time-stamped feed, Amber pounding, shouting, staging her lines. Me nowhere but the rectangle of light behind the glass, chain still set. The shift was subtle but decisive. The second officer pulled his partner aside, played the clip from the beginning. Ryan's wife stepped closer and offered her video too, capturing the same scene from another angle, the slur in Amber's voice, the staged fall to her knees. Claire pulled up just then, stepped out of her car, and simply stood beside Ryan's wife. 2 witnesses, silent but undeniable. "Ma'am, have you been drinking?" the second officer asked. Amber swayed. "I'm fine. He's lying." "We're going to run you through a quick assessment," he said, voice steady. She tried to recite the alphabet and failed by the letter M. When they asked for identification, she fumbled, trying to hand them the service envelope as if it were a shield. The nearer officer returned to my door. His tone had changed. "Sir, thank you for staying inside. Do you mind showing me the saved clip one more time for the report?" I scrolled, tapped, let the footage run, the timestamp clear in the corner. He watched to the end, then nodded. "Understood." Through the glass, I saw his apology assemble itself. "I'm sorry for the confusion. We have to take initial statements seriously." "So do I answered and meant it." They turned back to Amber. As they began the slow choreography of an arrest, she tried one last tactic, a limp collapse into the shrubs, a whispered complaint about bruises. The camera caught her staging it and missed the bruise she wanted to invent. The cuffs clicked shut, calm as a metronome. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for disorderly conduct and public intoxication," the officer said evenly. "You'll have an opportunity to contact counsel." Amber turned her face toward me through the glass, pupils blown wide, and mouthed something I didn't bother to read. They walked her to the cruiser with a steadiness that refused drama. Neighbors drifted back indoors, disappointed the spectacle had ended. Claire touched the porch rail once, like checking a pulse. Ryan texted from the curb, "Got it all. You good?" I texted back, "I will be." The officers returned, handed me a card with a case number, their apology now formal. I accepted. Apologies offered without audience still carried weight. When the cars left, the block exhaled. Silence returned, not as threat, but as boundary restored. Inside, I sat on the couch in the half-light and named the feeling, safety, finally returning to a room it had abandoned. Not triumph, not vindication, just safety. I forwarded the videos to my attorney with a subject line, facts, 9/12/9:38 p.m. Then I logged the call, the arrival, the arrest, every detail in the numbered notebook. Claire texted, "I'm going home. Call if anything changes. Proud of you for staying still." Ryan added, "Come by tomorrow, we'll watch bad TV." I left the phone face up and let it be quiet. In the kitchen, I washed the single glass I'd used, set it to dry. The house felt gentle for the first time in months, like it no longer braced for impact. I turned off the front camera monitor, left the porch light burning. Somewhere downtown, a booking officer asked Amber to list her belongings. Somewhere else, a printer stamped my name beside the word complainant. Paper kept doing its work, remembering without asking me to relive. I went to bed with the certainty of locks that worked. The index card on the fridge was still true in the morning. So was the plan. I hired movers, but I prepared the house as if I were documenting an excavation. The boxes weren't just boxes, they were exhibits. Before tape touched cardboard, I filmed each one open, narrating the contents in a flat, almost clerical tone. Furniture was photographed from 3 angles, front, side, and detail of condition, then labeled with block letters on painter's tape. Sofa, living room, premarital. Table, dining, joint. Every file synced to the cloud. Another copy locked in the safe, another sent to my attorney. Procedure wasn't vengeance. Procedure was armor. Where sentiment tried to interfere, procedure won. The lamp we found at a flea market one July, I kept it because its light had never lied to me. The cookbook with my notes in the margins because my handwriting didn't belong to her. A framed photo from the wedding I couldn't look at but couldn't yet destroy. I wrapped it in brown paper and wrote study later, as if ruin deserved an archive to be opened when it no longer burned. The house looked bigger without Amber's things, though bigger wasn't the same as better. Rooms echoed with a new, awkward honesty. Closets gaped like teeth missing fillings. I slept in the guest room out of habit because the marital bed still felt like debris, haunted by too much weight. I told myself it was temporary, but even with fresh sheets, the room smelled like memory. I began to imagine selling the place, even if the decree gave me the deed. Geography carried its own residue. A front yard could become a crime scene of laughter once shared. A driveway could replay the sound of doors slamming at 2 a.m. Better to move than live inside a mausoleum painted beige. The movers worked quickly, professional but careful, and I noticed how they avoided my eyes when they carried out the box holding her wedding dress or the framed print she once called our forever piece. I tipped them generously, thanked them twice, then walked the empty hallway like a museum that had finally closed to the public. Days later, her counsel sent a claim, damages to furniture that was never touched, scratches that did not exist. My attorney replied with the archive, videos, photos, inventories. The rebuttal was brief but devastating. Patience rendered as authority. "If they push further," he said, "it only strengthens your credibility." I felt a cool satisfaction, not in her loss, but in the solidity of paper. Documentation doesn't blink. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with one lamp glowing, writing a list of what I still owned and what I wanted to. The lists were short. A mug, a safe, a set of clean towels, a reputation for calm. The future, I realized, wasn't built by erasing the past. It was curated from what remained. I looked toward the guest room and considered it not a refuge, but a blank page. For the first time in months, I could imagine stepping into a room and finding it worth staying. The cabin wasn't a metaphor. It was wood and nails and quiet, a roofline tucked among pines, a dock stretching into a lake that sometimes looked like glass. The road up was narrow enough to make you courteous. Pines closed in, then opened like curtains, revealing dark shingles, a stubborn chimney, and the dent in the gutter where a storm branch once left its mark. I parked, killed the engine, and let silence sort itself. No alarms, no door chimes, no phone tugging at my sleeve. Just quiet, dense enough to feel like company. I carried in a cooler a paper sack with bread, eggs, apples, and coffee that didn't need a story to taste good. I had set myself one rule for this place, no drinking like I had in the first week after discovery. I kept it. Beer stayed cold and unopened. Water sweated in a glass. Meals were simple, eggs browned too fast in a skillet, chicken that smelled of pepper and apology. I scrubbed pans until they shone, savoring the relief of a task that ended cleanly when it ended. Mornings, I tried the woods. Some days I hunted and came back empty. Wind picked up and the forest translated it into 1,000 versions of the same warning. I didn't call it failure. Afternoons, I sat on the dock with a cheap rod and watched the bobber trace circles no one else would ever see. Sometimes a fish tugged, then changed its mind. That wasn't failure either. The point was staying until things passed. I texted Julia once to ask if she was safe. She replied from her parents' kitchen with family undecided, breathing easier. That was enough. Not every wound wanted a correspondent. I put the phone away and let the lake keep its own counsel. At night, the sky treated me like a beginner, patient, repetitive. I learned the path from porch to woodpile in darkness, the rasp of a match before flame, the way stacked pine caught if you didn't crowd it. I slept without alarms and woke the way I had as a boy on summer trips, slow, hungry, curious about weather. I kept a notebook and wrote rules for the self I wanted next. Tell the truth early. Leave before contempt grows. Choose the ordinary over spectacle. Protect people, not stories. Ask for help before you need rescue. Keep receipts that are paper, not wounds. Accept that some doors close without speeches. I underlined the one that mattered most. Never protect a story at the cost of yourself. The rules looked almost childish on the page, the way good rules often do. I didn't tear anything out. I didn't edit. By the second day, I fixed what I could. A hinge that squealed each winter. A screen torn by last year's shovel. A step that wobbled for attention. I oiled the reel, labeled the fuel can, stacked firewood in a shape my future self would respect. Repair was a kind of prayer you could do with a wrench. When I ran out of chores, I walked the perimeter and named things aloud. Cedar, alder, quartz, the soft ground where rain lingered. Naming wasn't control. Naming was attention. Attention was how you rejoined your life. Memories still arrived the way they always do. Wedding music sneaked in with the kettle's whistle. Amber's laugh clung to the smell of rain. Derek's porch floated up when a chainsaw roared across the lake. I let them pass like boats, noticed but not chased. The lake itself taught me. Reflections held until the wind disagreed, and then they vanished. In my jacket pocket, I found the old index cards. Attorney, locksmith, bank, therapist. Don't become the worst thing that happened to you. Clean exit, not victory laps. Their edges had softened from being handled like talismans. They had served their purpose. On my last night, I built a safe fire, laid the cards on the coals, and watched the ink blur into heat. Smoke wrote a gentle exit sign across the dark sky. I didn't pose for the camera. I just stood until the last corner turned to ash, and the ash decided to lift. Back inside, I opened the notebook to a blank page and wrote what I wanted my days to feel like once the decree arrived. Quiet mornings, coffee that tasted like its own reward, work that ended when it ended, a home heavy with honesty. I added one practical line, sell the house if it still feels haunted a month after the decree, and circled it. Plans weren't therapy. Plans were stairs. Sleep came quickly that night. I dreamed of nothing I needed to fix. In the morning, I cleaned the cabin as if I were a good guest, sheets washed, counters wiped, trash out. I left it ready for a return I wasn't sure I would need but wanted to allow. On my way out, I locked the door, then unlocked it again to tuck the spare key under a rock whose shape only I would remember. I locked the door a second time and didn't check it twice. Trust was small at first. You practiced it on doors. Driving home, the smell of smoke clung to my jacket. The road was the same, but the angles had changed. Grief wasn't an ocean. It had edges, and you could walk around edges. When the highway widened, I merged without looking back too long. The cabin was not a metaphor. It was a place I could leave and return to. Healing, I decided, could be that ordinary. The settlement conference began without drama, fluorescent lights, a carafe of water that tasted faintly of copier paper, 2 tables facing each other across a carpet that had witnessed 1,000 endings. The lawyers spoke first, bartering with numbers the way carpenters swap measurements. My counsel laid out terms that would have been generous even without the binder. With it, they read as mercy. Sell the house and split the proceeds, divide liquid savings equally, leave retirements at statutory minimums, and no spousal support flowing to the person who set the fire. Amber looked composed in the way she always had. Hair exact, spine tall, face arranged like a resume photo. Her attorney argued for more with the soft outrage of a man who made a career out of asking the universe for upgrades. My lawyer listened, palms flat, then rotated the binder toward the room. He opened it to the timeline and slid a tablet beside it with the porch camera clip cued. He didn't raise his voice. Paper didn't need volume. The air in the room shifted. Amber's attorney glanced at the timestamps, at the backsplash in Derek's kitchen that could be identified by a juror from 3 counties over. His throat cleared. His sentence softened from demand to question to conditional. My counsel offered a single line that fell like a plum weight. "We can do this in open court if necessary." The word necessary entered the room like weather. That's when Amber broke. Not with theatrics, no screaming, no slammed chairs. Just a collapse of posture, a voice that suddenly sounded young when she asked, "Is there anything I can do?" She wasn't talking to her lawyer. She was talking to me, as if the woman who once remembered my grocery list still lived somewhere inside her. I gave her the only answer that was both true and kind. Sign. No speeches, no parables about fire and consequence. No binder lifted again to make the point twice. Signing was the only act left that could reduce harm. Amber looked at her lawyer, then at the paper, then down at her own hands as though they might refuse. They didn't. She signed where the tabs asked her to, the pen scratching through the bones of our shared future. Tears followed, not a flood, just a slow leak. Steady as gravity. I watched with the calm detachment of someone already emptied. Tears weren't justice. They were physics. What had been lifted had to fall. The attorneys exchanged copies. The recorder clicked off. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for the transcript. Amber dabbed her eyes, trying to preserve a face that no longer carried authority, and left with her lawyer murmuring practical words about filing. I didn't watch her go. I stacked my papers carefully because care was a muscle I refused to let atrophy. Outside the room, I shook my lawyer's hand. "Thank you," I said, meaning more than the negotiation. Meaning the months he had told me, "Don't text, don't engage. Don't make any move that stains the record." He nodded like a man who preferred results over gratitude. "Next is the judge's stamp," he said. "Then the sale. Keep doing what you're doing." I rode the elevator alone, feeling how the floor decelerated beneath my feet. In the lobby, I texted Ryan a single word, "Done." He replied with a single mark, a period followed by another text, "Coffee." I sent back later. At home, I brewed coffee anyway. Rituals didn't belong only to mornings. While the kettle worked, I opened windows. The house took a breath like a patient waking from sedation. Air moved through hallways once thick with perfume and argument. I stood still and let it wash past me. I filed the signed copies in the safe and closed the door gently, as if not to wake anything. On the counter, I lined up the 3 objects I had kept on purpose. The flea market lamp, the cookbook with my grease-stained notes, the wedding photo wrapped in brown paper and labeled "Study Later." None of them felt like traps that day. They felt like artifacts in a museum that had finally digitized its collection. Afternoon folded into the house like a polite guest. I emailed counsel a thank you and resent the porch camera timestamps, not because he had asked, but because I liked the shape of a complete record. I deleted the draft text I had once written in rage and kept only as proof I hadn't sent it. I emptied the trash without ceremony. When I sat, the couch no longer felt like a witness stand. I drank coffee that tasted like its own reward and stared through the living room window at a rectangle of sky. Somewhere across town, ink dried on forms that carried their own gravity. Somewhere else, a clerk dropped a set into a bin labeled record. None of those places needed me anymore. Before I closed the windows, I heard the neighbor's sprinkler start. This time, the sound was only water arguing with lawn. I wiped a ring from the table, then wrote a new index card. Not the kind I had carried in my pocket during the worst months, but a quieter list to tape inside a cabinet door. Pay the photographer for the team photos. Meet Ryan for coffee. Box the wedding photo for the archive. Open the house to air again tomorrow. The house smelled like air. The future looked less like a verdict and more like a room I could walk into without rehearsing a defense. After the decree, life didn't explode into color. It simply resumed. The paperwork came back stamped, not celebrated, an ordinary envelope carrying the end of a marriage. No fanfare, just silence, and that silence was the point. I listed the house. Realtors spoke in percentages and market windows, but I nodded without debate. A young couple made an offer within weeks. I accepted without dramatics, no sentimental tour of rooms, no clutching at fading memories. I thanked the walls quietly for holding more than they should have, then left the keys on the counter. Geography, I reminded myself, was not a shrine. My new place was smaller, a second-floor walk-up with more light than square footage. I kept the lamp, the grease-stained cookbook that was mine alone, and replaced the bed with one that arrived in a flat box I assembled by hand. Every tightened screw felt like punctuation. This is mine. I bought a plant that would die if neglected, and I didn't neglect it. The green became a barometer for how well I was showing up to my own days. At school, I told the head coach I was ready for more responsibility next season, not because ambition had suddenly bloomed, but because consistency never abandoned me, even in the worst months. I wanted my players to know that showing up is survival in practice clothes. Amber texted once, a neutral apology wrapped around a suggestion to talk. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to counsel, deleted it from my visible world, and closed my phone. Some doors stay shut not out of hatred, but out of respect for clean air. Claire sent me a photo of a bookstore cat asleep on a stack of paperbacks with a caption, "You're okay." I believed it. I didn't confuse okay with settling. Okay wasn't an apology for wanting more. Okay was the ground you stand on before you climb again. Freedom, I learned, wasn't fireworks. It wasn't the cinematic walk away from an explosion. Freedom was a kitchen where honesty hung like sunlight, a coffee mug that tasted only of coffee, a front door that opened only to people you invited, laundry folded and not weaponized, silence that soothed rather than accused. I wasn't grateful she cheated. I would never romanticize the wound. But I was grateful I had chosen my exit. Ashes remained, but ashes weren't the end. They were what's left after fire has done its work. And sometimes they mark the soil where something better can grow. That night, I opened the windows of my new apartment. Air moved freely through uncluttered rooms, carrying the faint smell of basil from the plant on the sill. I sat at the table, lamp glowing, and wrote a single sentence in my notebook. My life is mine again. I underlined it once. Then I closed the book. Tomorrow would not be perfect, but it would be mine. And so Ethan's story ends not with fire, but with freedom. The courtroom decided, the lies exposed, and the neighbor's smirk erased by truth. Betrayal always comes with a price, and Amber paid hers in full. What about you? If you were in Ethan's place, would you have gone scorched earth or chosen another path? Share your thoughts below because your perspective might be the one that helps someone else. This is Cheating Stories 7. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and resilience. Until next time, take care and remember, the truth always wins in the end.